At 6:12 a.m., the scream that shattered the silence wasn't loud. It was sharp, irritated, and filled with the kind of entitlement that only grows when someone believes the world owes them obedience. That morning, Eleanor Hartley, a calm, silver-haired grandmother with a reputation for quiet elegance, stood at the top of her staircase, listening to her daughter-in-law, Brielle, snap. "You need to stop controlling us. Stay out of our lives." The words sliced through the hallway like a blade. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She had heard all kinds of tones over her 72 years. Anger, grief, frustration. But entitlement was the one she recognized quickest. It always came wrapped in insecurity. Most people would have responded defensively, emotionally, explosively. But Eleanor had learned long ago that the most powerful response is silence. And so she gave them exactly that, a soft nod, a faint smile. And the gentlest, almost unnoticeable, "All right," not a challenge, not a warning, just acceptance. Or so it seemed. If you enjoy stories where truth, karma, and quiet power collide, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It helps more people discover real-life dramas like this one, and you won't miss the next unforgettable twist. What Brielle didn't know, what Marcus had clearly forgotten, is that the house they lived in, the cars they drove, the vacations they took, the credit cards they swiped without reading the statements, all of it existed because Eleanor had built a life, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, long before either of them were born. Eleanor had set up a trust for Brielle when they married, not because she loved her immediately, but because she wanted Marcus's future family to thrive. She believed generosity cultivated unity. The argument had started over something painfully small, a simple discussion about Marcus's overspending on a new piece of equipment he didn't need. Eleanor had asked a question. Just a question. And Brielle exploded. "Stop interfering. We're adults. We don't need your oversight or your comments or your approval." She went on and on, words sharp enough to scrape, her voice echoing off the walls that Eleanor herself still paid insurance for. Eleanor realized something in that moment. It wasn't anger driving Brielle. It was pride mixed with insecurity, a combination that could rot even the strongest marriage. And Marcus, her once responsible son, had allowed it. He stood there frozen, hiding behind his wife's fury, letting her take the lead, letting her disrespect the very person who had lifted him into the life he now lived. But Eleanor was not a woman who acted impulsively. She was a strategist by nature, a long-game thinker, and so she walked away from the confrontation with the same controlled grace she had built her life with. No one, not Brielle, not Marcus, knew that her silence was the sound of a decision forming. The decision came into action the next morning. With one phone call to the trust manager, the monthly disbursements to Brielle's account were suspended indefinitely. With one email to the bank, every credit card linked to Eleanor's financial umbrella was frozen, Marcus's included. With a final, brief message to her attorney, documentation was prepared to restructure the trust entirely, if necessary. And yet, Eleanor did not breathe a word of it to them. No threats, no warnings, no dramatic speeches, only silence. It took exactly 1 week for the consequences to take shape. By the third day, Brielle tried buying groceries and the card declined. She assumed it was a glitch. By day 4, Marcus tried filling his truck's tank, and his card declined too. Confused, embarrassed, and increasingly frustrated, he called the bank, only to be told that the cardholder had frozen the account. Cardholder, his mother. By day 5, the automatic payment for their rental cabin bounced. By day 6, Brielle's salon appointment was denied at the counter. She raised her voice at the receptionist, stormed out, and blamed Marcus the entire drive home. But Marcus knew. Deep down, he knew exactly what had happened, though he was too ashamed to admit it aloud. And now, on day 7, 1 week after her explosive outburst, Brielle sat on their couch, with her knees pulled to her chest, the first signs of humility flickering through the cracks of her pride. She finally whispered the words Marcus never expected to hear. "I think I made a mistake with your mom." The admission didn't come easily. Brielle had spent years perfecting the armor she wore: sarcasm, confidence, sharp remarks, and a sense of superiority she used to mask every insecurity she carried. But now, stripped of the financial cushion she had taken for granted, she finally saw the truth she had refused to acknowledge. Eleanor had never controlled them. She had supported them. She had protected them. She had kept them afloat while they built their future. Marcus sat beside her, rubbing his forehead, feeling a swirl of guilt and clarity settle into his chest. He remembered the countless times his mother had helped him, quietly, without announcing it, without asking anything in return. She guided him through college, helped with the down payment on his first home, paid medical bills when he was injured, even supported him during the months he was unemployed. And he had allowed Brielle to accuse her of interfering. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt ashamed. Meanwhile, Eleanor sat in her sunroom with a cup of lavender tea, watching birds flutter across her garden. She wasn't celebrating their struggle, nor was she gloating. She simply believed in natural consequences. She believed that sometimes the only way people learn gratitude is by experiencing the absence of what they took for granted. Deep down, she hoped the lesson wouldn't destroy them, but reshape them. She wanted growth, not suffering. She wanted maturity, not punishment. But she also knew that enabling disrespect only breeds more of it. And so, she waited, calm, patient. Very soon. The call came later that afternoon, exactly as Eleanor expected. The phone vibrated on the small glass table beside her. The name, Marcus, glowing across the screen. She didn't rush. She let it ring twice, 3 times, before finally lifting it, with a calmness that came from having already lived through the emotional storms of motherhood. When she answered, her tone was soft, almost warm. "Hello, sweetheart." Marcus didn't respond immediately. She could hear him breathing, hesitating, trying to collect words that didn't want to come. When he finally spoke, the tension in his voice was unmistakable. "Mom, we need to talk." Eleanor stirred her tea gently. "Of course. What about?" Another pause. She imagined him standing in his living room, hand on his waist, eyes darting around, trying to figure out how to ask for help without admitting he was wrong. "Something happened with the cards," he said awkwardly. "I think there's been a mistake." "No mistake," Eleanor replied gently. "I froze them." Silence. A long one. She waited for the reaction. Anger, frustration, panic. Instead, she heard something unexpected. Defeat. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Because," she said, "your wife asked me to stop interfering in your lives. So I am giving her exactly what she wanted." Marcus swallowed audibly. "Mom." "It's all right," Eleanor interrupted softly, but not unkindly. "You both wanted independence. I respect that, truly. But independence requires responsibility. It requires gratitude. It requires awareness of where help comes from and what it costs. I simply removed myself from the equation, so you can stand on your own." She spoke without bitterness, without raising her voice, without even a trace of anger. And somehow that calmness hit Marcus harder than any shouting ever could. Before he could form a response, she added, "I am not punishing you. I am simply stepping back, completely. You're free now, financially, emotionally, practically. Free to make your own decisions and live without my influence. She paused. Isn't that what Brielle asked for? Marcus didn't answer. She could almost feel him shrinking on the other end of the call, realizing a truth he hadn't wanted to face. He and Brielle depended on her far more than they had ever admitted. Mom, Brielle wants to apologize, he finally whispered. Eleanor smiled sadly. An apology made out of inconvenience is not an apology, darling. It's desperation. But she means it, he insisted quickly. She understands now. We both do. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the warm light of the sunroom settle across her face. Good, she said. Understanding is a wonderful first step. Then she added with a softness that carried a sharp edge. But understanding has to lead to change. Meanwhile, across town, Brielle stood in their kitchen, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Her hair was tied messily on top of her head, and her eyes were puffy with frustration and something else. Worry. Real, heavy worry. She had always carried herself with a certain boldness, a loudness that masked doubt, but today that mask was slipping. When Marcus walked in, she stopped. Did you call her? Yes. And? She froze everything on purpose, he said quietly. She's stepping back. Brielle's throat tightened. She turned away, leaning her hands on the countertop. Marcus, we can't live without that support. Not yet. I thought we could, but... She exhaled shakily. I didn't realize how much she helped. She didn't say it out loud, but the thought echoed loudly in her mind. I didn't realize how much I relied on the very woman I disrespected. She sat down at the dining table and covered her face with her palms. I messed up, she admitted. I really messed up. Marcus sat across from her, exhausted. We both did. I should have stood up for Mom. I shouldn't have let that argument spiral. Brielle peeked through her fingers. I was wrong, Marcus. The words tasted bitter, but truthful. I shouldn't have talked to her like that. She's helped us more than anyone. I acted like she wanted control, when she only ever wanted to support us. For the first time, Marcus reached for her hand. Not to blame, not to argue, but to steady her. We need to fix this. But how? Brielle asked. A heavy silence stretched between them. At that same moment, miles away, Eleanor walked out to her garden, her soft-soled shoes crunching against the gravel pathway. Her roses were blooming, delicate petals unfolding in the afternoon sun. She paused in front of them, watering each plant with slow, careful movements. Gardening had always been her form of meditation. Simple, quiet, free of drama. As she worked, she replayed the events of the week. Not once did she smile at their downfall. She didn't enjoy their inconvenience. She didn't celebrate their discomfort. What she wanted was reflection, respect, awareness of value, not monetary, but emotional. She wanted them to grow into adults who understood that kindness is not ownership and support is not control. Later, that evening, the doorbell rang. Eleanor wasn't surprised. She had felt it coming, like the slow movement of a tide returning to shore. When she opened the door, she saw Marcus standing there, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped, eyes soft with apology. But before she could speak, she noticed Brielle behind him, eyes red, posture tense, hands fidgeting nervously. Eleanor didn't invite them in immediately. She simply looked at them with patient curiosity, waiting to see how they would begin. Brielle stepped forward first. Her voice shook. Eleanor, I'm so sorry for the things I said, for the way I acted. I was rude, disrespectful, and wrong. Completely wrong. Eleanor didn't respond. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She simply observed. I didn't realize how much you did for us, Brielle continued. I thought your concern was interference. I thought your advice was criticism. I let my pride get in the way, and you didn't deserve that. Marcus cleared his throat. Mom, I'm sorry too. I should have stopped it. I should have defended you. Still, Eleanor remained silent. Brielle swallowed. I know we don't deserve your forgiveness right away. I know we don't deserve your help. But we are asking for a chance to fix what we broke. Not because we need your money, but because we need your presence. Those last 4 words struck deeper than any financial plea could have. Slowly, Eleanor stepped aside and gestured for them to come in. The door closed behind them with the softest click, one that sounded more like a beginning than an ending. The living room felt different that evening. Not cold, not hostile, but heavy with a kind of fragile sincerity that only appears when people are trying to rebuild something they nearly destroyed. Marcus and Brielle sat side by side on the couch, their posture stiff at first, their minds racing ahead of their words. Eleanor took her time settling into her armchair, crossing one leg over the other, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wasn't angry. She wasn't smug. She simply waited, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough for honesty to grow inside it. Finally, she spoke, not with accusation, but with a gentle firmness that carried more weight than any shouting ever could. Tell me what you've learned. The question surprised both of them. Brielle blinked rapidly, her breath catching. Learned? Yes, Eleanor said. You've had a week without support. A week without the financial cushion you've grown accustomed to. A week without me interfering. She tilted her head. So tell me, what did it teach you? Marcus looked down at his hands, the calluses on his palms, seeming more obvious now, without the ease of his usual comforts. I learned how much I depended on you without realizing it, he said quietly. Not just financially, emotionally. I took your presence for granted, and your silence this week felt louder than anything. Eleanor nodded once, but didn't speak. Then Brielle inhaled shakily. I learned that I let my pride turn into cruelty, she said, voice soft, trembling. I thought your guidance was judgment. I thought your help was control. I convinced myself you were trying to run our lives, when all you ever did was try to make them easier. Her throat tightened, and when you stepped back, I realized how much you held everything together. Eleanor finally leaned back, studying them with sharp, perceptive eyes. Do you know, she began softly, that I never expected gratitude. Not once. I never asked for thanks. I never asked you to worship me, or bow to me, or treat me like anything other than Marcus's mother and your family. But respect. She paused. Respect is non-negotiable. Brielle wiped her cheek quickly. I know, and I'm sorry, truly. Eleanor didn't move, but something in her expression softened, just slightly, enough to ease the tension in the room. Apologies are important, she said, but change matters more. Marcus nodded. We'll do better. Eleanor let the silence settle again before responding. I want to believe that. I hope to. But you must understand something. Trust isn't repaired with words. It's repaired with consistency. There was no anger in her tone. Only truth. Then, in a rare moment of vulnerability, she added, And I am not as strong as you think. I felt hurt by the things you said. Brielle, deeply. I have lived long enough to know that people often say things they regret in moments of anger. But the part that wounded me was how little either of you paused to consider my heart. Marcus looked up sharply. Mom. She held up a hand gently. Let me finish. A family is not built on convenience. It is not built on comfort. It is built on care. And care flows both ways. Brielle's eyes flooded with guilt. I didn't show you care. I didn't even show basic decency. No, Eleanor agreed softly. You didn't. The honesty stung, but it was necessary. Growth rarely blooms in comfort. After a few moments, Eleanor stood and walked toward the fireplace. She picked up a framed photo of Marcus as a boy, missing front teeth, proudly holding a trophy from his first Little League game. Her gaze softened as she traced the edges of the frame. I raised my son to be kind, she said quietly, to be thoughtful, to value family, and I'm not upset that he married a strong woman. I admire strength. I admire boldness. I admire confidence. She turned and looked directly at Brielle. But strength without humility becomes pride, and pride without awareness becomes cruelty. The words settled over the room like a soft snowfall, quiet but impossible to ignore. Brielle lowered her head. I don't want to be that person anymore. Eleanor studied her for a long moment, then walked back to her chair. Good, she said simply. And let's talk about what happens next. Marcus straightened a little. We'll do whatever you think is right. Eleanor smiled faintly. That's the thing, darling. This isn't about what I think is right. It's about what you will choose moving forward. They exchanged confused glances, unsure what she meant. Eleanor continued. I am willing to forgive. I am willing to rebuild trust. I am even willing to restore my support, but only with boundaries in place, clear boundaries. Marcus nodded immediately. Of course, anything. But Brielle leaned forward cautiously. What kind of boundaries? Eleanor folded her hands again. To start, I will help, but I will not enable. If there are financial emergencies or reasonable needs, I will step in. But the trust funds will remain paused for now. The credit cards will stay closed. You will spend 1 month managing your own expenses without any reliance on me. Marcus swallowed. A month? Eleanor affirmed. If you can handle that responsibility with maturity and teamwork, then we can discuss restoring access gradually. Brielle looked up, surprised. You're giving us a chance? Yes, Eleanor said gently. A chance. Not a punishment, not a test. A chance to prove to yourselves that you can stand, even if it's uncomfortable at first. Marcus exhaled, relief mixing with nervousness. We can do that. But Eleanor held up a finger. And one more boundary. We communicate with respect. Always. No shouting. No accusations. No speaking from pride instead of clarity. Brielle nodded quickly. We agree. Both of us. Eleanor studied them carefully. Then her expression warmed, softening into something maternal, something familiar, something that had been overshadowed by pain but never truly lost. Good, she whispered. They stayed for dinner. Simple pasta, warm bread, and a small salad from Eleanor's garden. Conversation at first was cautious, but slowly became more natural. Marcus shared updates from work. Brielle talked about a new project she wanted to pursue on her own. Eleanor listened with genuine curiosity, offering thoughts but never overstepping. When they finally stood to leave, Brielle hugged her. Not out of desperation, not out of obligation, but out of sincerity. It was fragile, hesitant, but real, and Eleanor gently hugged her back. As the door closed behind them, she allowed herself a small smile, not of victory, but of hope. The kind of hope that grows when people crash into their own mistakes, rise from them, and choose to do better. Growth had begun, quietly, slowly. And this time, it felt real. At first, they tried to pretend nothing was wrong. The daughter-in-law strutted around the house as usual, tossing online shopping carts worth hundreds of dollars, expecting everything to go through, like always. But that afternoon, Her phone buzzed with a notification that made her face drop. Payment declined. Contact your provider. She tried again. Declined. Tried a third time. Declined. Her forced smile cracked. Later that evening, their electricity bill bounced. Her gym subscription got canceled automatically. Her husband's credit card was blocked at the gas station, and he had to leave his ID behind as collateral. By nightfall, panic finally hit. The daughter-in-law slammed the bedroom door and started shouting. "Why is everything getting declined? Your mother must have done something. Call her right now, colon." The son hesitated for the first time. He knew the truth. Every comfort in their life came from his mother's generosity. Pose. But he had stood with his wife when she spit out, "Stop interfering in our lives." Pose. Now that independence suddenly felt very, very expensive. He dialed his mother with trembling fingers, but she didn't pick up. Pose. And that silence, burn, was louder than any punishment they could have imagined. Pose. If the first week had shaken them, but the second week broke them. Pose. Brielle tried to hold on to her pride at first. She acted unfazed, scrolling through shopping apps she could no longer afford, pretending nothing had changed. But on day 12, strong, reality landed like a punch. Slash. Pose. Their landlord called. His tone was stiff, annoyed, a little embarrassed himself. "Marcus, your rent bounced again. I need that payment today, not tomorrow. Today." Marcus swallowed hard, his stomach twisting. I understand. I'll figure it out." But he didn't figure it out. He couldn't. He sat on the edge of the bed afterward, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else, a weaker man, a man he never thought he'd become. Brielle watched him from the doorway. Her frustration wasn't loud anymore. It had shrunk into a scared, quiet thing, hiding behind her ribs. "Marcus," she whispered, "what are we going to do?" He didn't look up. "I don't know." For the first time since they married, Marcus looked defeated, not annoyed, not tired, but broken. And that terrified her more than any declined payment. That night, their power flickered, then dimmed, then cut out completely. The house sank into darkness. Brielle sat on the couch, hugging her legs, shivering not from cold, but from fear. Fear of losing everything. Fear of being exposed. Fear of finally seeing the truth she had ignored for years. Eleanor didn't trap them with help. She carried them with help. And without it, they were drowning. Marcus lit a candle and placed it on the table. Its glow flickered across their faces, revealing the exhaustion and the shame they could no longer hide. "This is my fault," Brielle whispered into the dimness. "All of it." Marcus didn't answer. Not because he disagreed, but because he finally agreed. For a long moment, the room was silent. Only the soft crackle of the candle filled the air, like a quiet witness to their unraveling. "I can't keep living like this," Brielle choked. "I can't keep pretending I'm strong when I'm acting like a child." Marcus finally raised his head. "We need to talk to her. Not for money, not for the cards, for forgiveness." Brielle's voice broke. "I don't think she'll even open the door. Then we knock until she does." The next morning, they did. They drove across town in silence, both rehearsing apologies that felt too small for the damage they had caused. When they got to Eleanor's home, the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in pale gold. Marcus stepped out first. Brielle followed, her hands trembling, her chest tight. But before they reached the porch, they froze. Eleanor was already sitting outside, on her garden bench, a soft shawl thrown over her shoulders, a cup of warm tea in her hand. She looked calm, peaceful, completely unsurprised. As if she had known they would come. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply lifted her eyes and met theirs with a quiet, unreadable expression. Marcus swallowed. Hard. Mom, we. Eleanor held up a gentle hand. Sit, she said softly. And somehow, that single word broke the last of their pride. They sat, side by side on the wooden bench across from her, like two children waiting for a truth they had avoided for far too long. The silence stretched, but this silence wasn't punishment. It wasn't anger. It was invitation. An invitation to honesty, to humility, to begin again. Brielle was the first to crack. Her voice came out in a choked whisper. Eleanor, we're falling apart. Eleanor didn't flinch. Brielle continued, tears slipping down her cheeks. And I know now, it's because we didn't appreciate you. Because I didn't appreciate you. I confused your kindness with control. I confused your support with interference. She swallowed. I was wrong. I was cruel. And I'm so sorry. Marcus nodded, voice low and defeated. We don't deserve anything. Not your help, not your trust. But we're here because we want to fix what we broke. He paused. And because we miss you. For the first time, a small flicker of emotion passed through Eleanor's eyes. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but relief. She placed her teacup down slowly and stood. Her voice was soft, but powerful, like a whisper that could move mountains. You cannot build a life on pride. You cannot build a marriage on entitlement. And you cannot build a family without respect. Then she walked toward them, her steps steady, graceful, certain. And now, she added quietly, you finally understand that. Brielle wiped her face, nodding desperately. Yes, I understand. We both do. Eleanor exhaled, the kind of long, quiet breath a mother releases only when the weight she carried finally begins to lift. Good, she whispered. Then we can start healing. But then her tone sharpened, gently, not cruelly. But healing comes with truth. And the truth is, actions will matter more than apologies. Marcus nodded. We know. Do you? Eleanor asked softly. Because what comes next will show me. The wind brushed past them, carrying the scent of roses. Brielle looked up, voice trembling. What comes next? Eleanor folded her hands, calm, firm, unshakable. You will rebuild. You will prove yourselves, and I will watch. Then she added, but today we talk, and we begin again. As family, not enemies. And for the first time in 2 weeks, Marcus's shoulders lowered. Brielle's breathing steadied. And Eleanor allowed herself the smallest, warmest smile. The storm had not ended, but the rebuilding had begun. By the end of the second week, Brielle and Marcus were completely humbled. The initial panic had faded, replaced by quiet, desperate reflection. Every convenience they had taken for granted was suddenly gone, and with it, their arrogance had crumbled. They had realized, painfully, that Eleanor's support had not been control. It had been care, and without it, their lives were shaky at best. It was on a quiet Saturday morning that Eleanor finally decided it was time for the final act of her quiet, surgical lesson. She invited them over for brunch, not to scold, not to lecture, but to observe. She had prepared the table with care, fresh fruit, warm pastries, and Marcus's favorite omelet. But there was a subtle tension in the air, one that Brielle immediately noticed. Eleanor began with calm, deliberate words. I hope you've had a week to reflect on what it means to take someone's generosity for granted. Her voice was soft, but carried the weight of authority. Because there is something you need to understand before any reconciliation can happen. Brielle's hands trembled slightly, and Marcus swallowed hard. They exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. They knew the storm had not yet passed. Eleanor continued, When I froze your accounts, I didn't act out of anger. I acted to teach a lesson. But lessons are only valuable when they lead to real understanding. And I need to see that in action. Then she handed them a folder. Inside were detailed budgets, bills, and projections. From now on, you will manage your finances entirely on your own. No assistance. No backup. No privileges. Brielle's voice faltered. Mom, we understand, but... No buts, Eleanor interrupted, her tone firm. You will live with the consequences of your choices as you demanded. Only then can you truly appreciate the value of support, respect, and family. The son and daughter-in-law both nodded, realizing fully that the lesson was far from over. But Eleanor wasn't finished. She leaned in slightly, her silver hair catching the sunlight, eyes sharp as daggers, yet calm as a still lake. And remember, she said, voice dropping to a near whisper that carried a quiet, terrifying power. All the luxuries you thought you deserved so easily are privileges, not rights. Disrespect them again, and you will find them permanently out of reach. Consider this your final warning. For the first time, Brielle felt fear, not of punishment, but of losing the foundation of her life. Marcus's jaw tightened, a mixture of guilt and awe coursing through him. He realized that Eleanor had orchestrated the entire week perfectly. No shouting, no humiliation, no drama, just a silent, undeniable power that had dismantled their pride, piece by piece. And then, in a move both calculated and merciful, Eleanor smiled. It was a subtle, soft smile, but it contained triumph, resolution, and hope. Now, she said, let's begin rebuilding, not just your finances, but your respect and your character. The daughter-in-law and her husband looked at each other, and then at Eleanor, realizing they had been utterly outmaneuvered. But unlike the anger they had expected, there was no cruelty in her. Only clarity. Only justice. They left her house that day, changed, humbled, aware, and grateful. Eleanor's revenge had been complete. But her ultimate goal was not to punish. It was to teach, to awaken, and to restore balance. In silence, in patience, in strategy, she had reshaped the lives of those who had once dismissed her, proving that true power lies not in shouting or forcing, but in quiet, unyielding action. As they drove home, Brielle squeezed Marcus's hand. I understand now, she whispered. I see what we took for granted. I see who she really is. Marcus nodded, eyes forward on the road. We'll never forget this lesson, and we'll never take her or what she's given us for granted again. Eleanor watched them leave, standing at the doorway with the softest smile. Her lesson had been delivered perfectly, without chaos, without confrontation, without regret. And in that quiet victory, she knew her family had finally learned the meaning of respect, gratitude, and humility. The storm had passed. The silence had spoken louder than words. And in the end, Eleanor had won, not by force, but by patience, wisdom, and quiet, undeniable power.